My name is Sartini. I'm an English teacher, and welcome to my online classroom, a space where we read and analyze works of English literature to better understand how to live. Today we're doing a summary and analysis of Chapter 4 in The Great Gatsby, beginning now with a summary. What happens? Three key elements. Gatsby and Nick have a dialogue, and Gatsby's sort of backstory is espoused to Nick, and we go over the persona of Gatsby. Then we meet one of Gatsby's older friends, Meyer Wolfshire. We analyze his character a little bit. And then the third portion of the chapter is about Daisy's relationship with Gatsby and how that sort of began and how Daisy got to where she is, how Gatsby got to where he is. Beginning now, we're going to start out with a review of Gatsby's persona, I guess, when he's speaking with Nick. So, Nick begins with, I had talked with him perhaps half a dozen times in the past month and found to my disappointment that he had little to say. So my first impression, that he was a person of some undefined consequence, had gradually faded and had become simply the proprietor of an elaborate roadhouse next door. So Nick is sort of saying like the majesty of Gatsby over time wore off, because he doesn't seem to really have anything to say. Gatsby doesn't espouse any grand opinions or sort of analyses of how the world works. Like there's no philosophical soliloquy about his thoughts about the nature of the universe. It's more, he's a quiet man, so it sounds like when he's up close. And maybe that's why he sort of doesn't necessarily speak with any of his guests at parties, one could say. Maybe that's why he's so enigmatic to other people, because he is in reality quiet. But is that the truth? I'm not sure. And so Nick just sort of sees him as the eccentric guy with the crazy parties next door, but nothing really more. And he's kind of curious about who Gatsby might really be, as I think the audience is. So Fitzgerald's going to take some time to really, take away some of those questions. And Gatsby says, look here, old sport. What's your opinion of me, anyhow? And Nick is like, I don't know, you tell me. And Gatsby goes, of course I'll tell you right now, Nicky boy. I'll tell you God's truth. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford because of my ancestors. They've all been educated there for many years. It's a family tradition. He looked at me sideways, and I knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. So, Gatsby's making this enormous display of, I will finally tell you my past, boy, and who I am and where I've come from. Hence, let me see. Sit down, boy, and I shall tell you whence. So he's giving this big display, and he's like, I swear an oath to the Lord that the truth is nothing but the truth shall exhale from my mouth. I am but an Oxford man. I come from a long lineage of Oxford fellows, and that lineage is deceased, and I am but a mere orphan, a wealthy, wealthy orphan. So he makes up this story, basically, that he is descended from wealth. And then he comes from a distinct notion of status. Now, eventually we'll learn to find out that this isn't true. But I would suppose he does that because what Gatsby wants is to prove his own worth. And that's where the persona of the Great Gatsby comes from. He wants to prove his value. Now, this story, in a sense, or a theme rather, is old money versus new money. It's one who is descended from large amounts of wealth versus someone who has recently made their wealth. And Gatsby's one who recently made his wealth. And he sort of always knew he had a sense of worth about him, but because he doesn't originally come from money, there's always a sort of dejected look towards him from the upper classes. And he desperately wants to prove he is upper class, so he's trying to put on these parties perhaps, and have all these books in his home and be with all these people just so he can look like he has come from money his entire life, and that was normal and natural for him. He wants to be in that sort of older status in the world, and that's probably why he's invented this sort of backstory where he has this tip-top education. He comes from a grand lineage, as all others do, and his parents are so well-to-do and gorgeous, but these things cannot be corroborated as his parents are in fact dead. So no one can really prove any of this. And that's why Nick sort of knows this, and Jordan has also felt this, so they think he's lying. But can Gatsby prove any of these claims? Nick says, well, what part of the Middle West? San Francisco. Ah, I see. My family died, and I came into a good deal of money. Okay, so Gatsby's from the Midwest, And the Midwest is now San Francisco. You mean all the way in the West, like the Western Seaboard, San Francisco, California, San Francisco? Is that the Midwest? No, it's not. So Gatsby, is he really knowledgeable? I don't know about that. I don't know if he knows what's going on. That's odd. And he says, after that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe. Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me long ago. So, Gatsby says, I was born from wealth. When my parents died, I inherited a vast fortune. After I inherited that fortune, I just kind of gallivanted and traveled throughout the world doing various rich person things like hunting elephants and opening chests of rubies. Which is like, okay, that's a pretty cool story. I would do that too if I was an orphan and inherited a bunch of money, right? Basically what I do now with my life, which is travel around the world and gain new experiences. So that makes sense to me as someone who lives similar to that. And he says, then came the war, old sport. It was a good relief, and I tried very hard to die, but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when it began. In the Agron forest, I believe that's in Italy, I took the remains of my machine gun battalion so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Lewis guns, and when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of dead. I was promoted to be major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration. Even Montenegro, little Montenegro down the Adriatic Sea. So Gatsby saying, I lived a privileged life of gallivanting around the world, but then World War I happened, and I came back home, and I served my country, and I did my duty, and I came out a war hero. However, there are 2 interesting comments that are made within these passages. So one, he's saying, he wanted to travel the world as a means to escape a sort of sadness. And when he was on the battlefield, he tried very hard to die, but his transcendent destiny, or belief in transcendent destiny, belief in his internal value, is what preserved his life. So he has sort of a specialness about him that he relies on to survive. However, it's not that he was trying to survive. It seems like, in a way, he was actually trying to get shot, and that was part of the reason he wanted to die, and so he advanced into German lines. But because he was so successful, or so well burdened with a proper destiny from birth, he was able to actually defeat all of the enemies and therefore receive a promotion. So he's a survivor just by, godly luck, one could say. But he wanted to die. And it seems like, it's not, I wouldn't say his family died, but maybe that's a cover-up sort of where something within him died. And he had some sort of problem that he could never really overcome. And it's something that haunts him again. And maybe that goes back to the idea of what preyed on Gatsby. Something died. Maybe his parents, sure, but maybe it was some other form of connection that he might have had, which had died. And maybe that's the sort of thing that led him to travel and led him to seek death. Yet that wasn't exactly in the cards for him. So he's sort of maybe confused in a sense of what to do now, or maybe that thing still haunts him and drives all of his motive. So then he talks about having a medal from Montenegro for valor, which he keeps in his pocket. He has a photo of him with people from Oxford, and it says here, I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there, trying to forget the sad things that happened to me. So he's saying again, like, listen, I have a Medal of Honor, and I have a photo of me being from Oxford. So these are, to some degree, true. So these are little things that have now, Nick is questioned is like, oh, okay, well, if you have photos and actual evidence, of course, I'm going to believe you, or I'm prone to believing you, because partially he wants to as well. Gatsby, again, I didn't want you to think I was just somebody. So Gatsby says, I have a transcended destiny. Look at how amazing I am. I know you can see it. I believe in myself, and you should too, old sport. And he says, listen, I usually just drift about here and there, and maybe that's why I don't really have any connections. But really, it might be connectivity itself that I'm running away from, because I'm really trying to, quote, forget the sad things that happened to me. So that leaves us, again, sort of an enigma in his past. Really, is he sad because of his parents dying, or is there something more, I would wonder, at this stage? And after that, Gatsby drives Nick to New York to meet up with his friend Meyer Wolfsheim. I'm going to try to go over this fast, so If I'm a little discombobulated, please forgive me. So Meyer is essentially a man who they meet in a speakeasy. So speakeasy is a place where you have a regular restaurant, and then below that is like a private bar. Bars at this point are banned. They've been banned since 1919. And alcohol was banned in 1920, I'm pretty sure, in that order. So, we are going into the normative world of restaurant, a normative world of New York City, and then going below that in a sort of underground space. I would liken this to the underworld itself. Meyer seems sort of like a devilish looming figure of darkness and intrigue in a sense. And Meyer immediately kind of seems like a mafia guy because he approaches Nick and is like, hey, I understand you're looking for a business negotiation. And Gatsby has to come and say, whoa, no, this isn't the man. This is not the man. This is just a friend. I told you where to talk about that some other time. I beg your pardon. I had a wrong man. So sort of Wolfsheim is a character who is going after deals. He's sort of, this. I would like him to like a deal with the devil kind of figure. Like he's always scouting to, move towards some advantage and work with people socially to an end that benefits him in particular. And we can see here that Wolfsheim wants to take Nick into that underworld immediately. He puts his hand out to make that offer, but Gatsby actually pulls Nick back. He's like, this is someone different. Thinks Gatsby. This isn't one of our usual friends. He's somebody special, or at least to me. He's not like us, is what that says to me, which is kind of interesting. And, Nick is like, oh, how long have you known Gatsby for? And Meyer's like, oh, we've known each other for a long time. He is the, quote, there's the kind of man you'd like to take home and introduce to your mother and your sister. So Meyer's saying, this guy, highest quality character possible. And he's saying, not only does he have the highest quality of character, he's very virtuous. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. He would never so much as look at a friend's wife. That's interesting comment. So not only does Wolfshire find that Gatsby is legitimate, he is the real deal, and this is someone of alleged prominence, Wolfsheim saying Gatsby is also prominent. So it's two sort of monolithic people, these larger-than-life figures. They're acknowledging each other's existence, which gives some legitimacy to Gatsby's backstory. And he's also saying that this guy is so virtuous, he wouldn't even so much as look at a friend's wife. So he is someone who would never encourage cheating or lying or any kind of abandonment or disunity between people, is one way you could read that statement. However, another way, a deeper way, is interesting. He's very careful about women. Does that go in with why he doesn't drink? Does he have a sort of, women problem? Is he dating a lot of women? Well, no, he can't be if he's careful. So he has to date one woman or no woman at all. And is he married, or why isn't he not married? And what do you mean careful by women? Did something bad with the woman happen in his past? Or is he trying to present a certain persona of dignity to perhaps gain one woman in particular? We don't know yet. And, Nick is sort of curious about this Meyer fellow. And Gatsby says, oh, he's fantastic. He's really a gambler by trade, and he even fixed the World Series. And Nick's like, what? Fixed the World Series? And he's like, yeah, of course. He rigged the whole baseball World Series to get a lot of money, and he made it really well with it, but he's so intelligent that no one could ever catch him. Everyone knows, actually, that Meyer rigged this series and made a bunch of money on it, but because he's so intelligent and crafty that no one can really pin him on any charges. And, he's really identifying that Meyer is an intelligent man. So Meyer, very background character. One can infer later on, perhaps, that Gatsby has gained all of his wealth from Meyer, and Meyer is a sort of, underground or mafia sort of man that Gatsby at some point made a deal with. Gatsby perhaps may be the face of his operation. That's why Meyer likes him, because he acts like this dignified man. And Gatsby's dignified excellence is sort of a rouge, like, ooh, look at how cool this man is, and I'm going to launder money through his name. But you're not going to ever suspect him because his character is so high, or his persona that he's projecting is so high. So those are some general ideas about this Meyer Wolfsheim fellow. Now we're going to go into the real meat and potatoes here about Daisy Faye Buchanan. Jordan and Nick are sort of talking about Daisy and her past. And I have so many quotes on this. I hope we can get through it. Basically, Jordan met Daisy from childhood. They both lived in Louisiana, I believe, or Louisville. I don't know if it's Kentucky or Louisiana. I live in the North. I am a Jersey boy. I don't understand. So Jordan met Daisy when she was little. When Jordan was a little girl, Daisy seemed to be about a teenager, and Daisy as a teenager only hung out with older fellows, perhaps early 20s. So we can see in her society that Jordan was the most removed, and then Daisy was always like the golden gal, center of attention sort of type. And it was kind of odd that Jordan was being able to spend time with Daisy, but because Daisy really didn't seem to have any female friends, she was always immersed in male attention. There's sort of a disconnect between Daisy and her relationships in general, of always being valued but never really having a true friend. So that's kind of what the role Jordan seems to play. And Jordan begins to say the following. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Faye's house. She was just 18, 2 years older than me, and by the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. She dressed in white and had a little white roadster, and all day long the telephone rang in her house, and exciting young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her that night. Anyways, for an hour. So, Daisy's name is interesting to me. So I suppose her maiden name is Faye. Now, Faye is a Gaelic term. I believe that would be descended from Celtic or Irish, or the original language of Ireland, if I'm correct, maybe. Gaelic is the origin. And Faye, my favorite name in the whole world. If I had a daughter, 100% naming her Faye. Love it. After my grandmother. And Faye translates in English to fairy. So you have Daisy, a flower, fairy. That is her full name. I had this philosophy about human people, particularly in the brand of young men and women. If I was to do an analysis on the character, let's say, of a young woman, who Daisy is in this situation, I would call her a fairy girl, or one who is sort of beautiful and charming, and mainly follows stimulus, or the wealthy people, or the parties, or if you're in college, you're going out to the bars and drinking alcohol, and maybe you're not giving so much into your studies, so much into building a reality, but rather you're drifting off into stimulus and the fun and the intrigue of various parties and social behaviors, but you're not necessarily real, and you don't necessarily have a grounded physical identity, or a deeply understood experience of the self, but rather you're chasing experience, and like a little sort of hummingbird, you're going from flower to flower to flower, experience, sipping just little pits here and there, but never making a grounded stay in one area, so to speak, is how I would suggest the younger Daisy character might be. So in a sense, she isn't necessarily much like a fairy is both real as in a concept which exists in our minds, but is in a physical form. That would be, again, how I'm referencing Daisy's character as a whole. And she's also a representation of purity. She's in all white. She's loved and adored by men. She's very captivating to them. Particularly in this flashback, we're learning that Daisy is very popular with the local military crowd, the officers who are about to be deployed to World War I. And Jordan says that in her car, she was, quote, sitting in it with a lieutenant I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. So Daisy, out of all of these hundreds of male suitors, she's selected one man, and they are sitting in her car, and he is a lieutenant. The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime, and because it seemed romantic to me, I have remembered the incident ever since. His name was Gatsby, and I didn't lay eyes on him again for over 4 years. Even after I'd met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. So we see, now this is becoming interesting. So Daisy and Gatsby were once an item. Or rather, before Gatsby went off to war, it seemed like Daisy was sweet on him, and that was the person out of all people that she chose, and that this man made her wildly happy beyond any human comprehension. And the reality was that Daisy was likely happy because Jay does have a sort of transcendent golden boy charm. He does have a sort of amazing persona that he can throw on that makes you feel like you are the most important person in the world. And it's funny enough because Daisy, as we described in our Chapter 1 analysis, is sort of a siren. She has her own sort of murmur, her own sort of call, her own sort of speech, which captivates people just like Gatsby does. So in a sense, they're both sort of perfect for each other because they both have this beautiful way to captivate and involve everybody very intimately in the feeling that they are important, which is kind of cool. And, here's a good quote I think is important for context. Jordan says, I didn't see Daisy very often. She went with a slightly older crowd when she went with anyone at all. So sort of Daisy's very selective, and sort of that she's just sort of carried on through life with these rich older gentlemen. She doesn't necessarily want to be there, but she's more carried, or she's more moved, possessed even, one could say. Wild rumors were circulating about her, how her mother had found her packing her bag one winter night to go to New York and say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. She was effectually prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks, and that she didn't play around with the soldiers anymore, but only with a few flat-footed, short-sighted young men in town who couldn't get into the army at all. So that's pretty cool. So it seems like she was so in love and infatuated with Gatsby, and I'm sure she would have been thrilled for him to marry her, but Gatsby had to go off to war, and he was saying, I'd appreciate nothing more more than if you would see me off in New York when I leave on my battleship. And, Daisy was packing her bags frantically to go over there, but, her parents, didn't want her with this military man. They preferred her with somebody rich from the wealthier, older class, from the old money. And Daisy was so upset that they held her back from going to New York that she didn't speak to them for weeks at a time. So we can see Daisy highly passionate about their relationship with Gatsby for whatever reason. But then... Oh, here's a good one. So she's upset and doesn't go with Gatsby, so perhaps you could infer that her parents try to set her up with, short-sighted young men in town. Except, funny enough about them, they couldn't get into the army at all. So that's kind of a nice jab to the old money crowd. It's like, these people have such grandiose wealth, but really they would die immediately if they went to war. Actually, they wouldn't even die if they went to war because they can't even get to that point in time where they would be so much as selected to go into the army, even if there was a bloody draft. So, that's a really interesting take on old money. It's saying, what are you really worth? Take away all that money, who are you? Take away the fancy clothes, what do you look like? Throw you out in a battlefield, how would you fare? The answer to those questions would be you'd be nothing, gentlemen. So that's interesting. And Jordan also then says, well, by the next autumn, she was gay again. Gay as ever. Super pumped. Why is she pumped? She was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville ever knew before. So that's interesting. So Daisy is in love with the dude. The dude leaves. To cope, she tries to get married to a random dude from New Orleans, but he's not important to any degree, so his name isn't even mentioned, nor is the backstory. And instead now we have her marrying Tom, some very wealthy man from Chicago, so wealthy, in fact, that he's more wealthy than everyone collectively in her area, perhaps combined. I was a bridesmaid. I came into a room half an hour before the bridal dinner, and found her lying on her bed, as lovely as the June night, in her flowered dress, and as drunk as a monkey. So when she goes to get married to Tom, in finality, what happens? She is sobbing on her bed, crying hysterically, and drunk. And she's wearing, I believe, a string of pearls that Tom bought for her. And that string of pearls, if I remember correctly, is valued at $325,000 in the 1920s currencies. Probably adjusted for inflation, I'm sure that'd be over $1 million. And she says, Daisy, as she's drinking and drinks, she says, take them downstairs and you'll give them back to whoever they belong to. Tell them Daisy's changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind. She began to cry. She cried and cried. I rushed out and found her mother's maid, and we locked her door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it to the hot tub. She took it to the tub with her and squeezed it up into a wet ball, and only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow. So Daisy's off to get married. She's super pumped, super excited. OMG attention, OMG a rich man's gonna marry me. I get a letter in the mail, and who's it from? Oh, it's from Gatsby. Oh my God, he still loves me. Why couldn't I marry Gatsby? I miss him every day of my life. I didn't mean to cope with him by trying to get married to two strange men. I miss him so much. Why couldn't he come back? OMG, he's at war. I'm alone. Is basically what's happening in Daisy's head, and she's trying to numb that out with alcohol. She specifically makes the claim that she doesn't drink, but this is the only time in her entire life when she's gotten drunk, because now, on the day of her wedding to this rich, fancy man, she realizes that she actually doesn't want to marry this guy, probably doesn't know anything about him, doesn't even like him, really just wants to love and be married with Gatsby, but he's not from the right class, so she can never marry him anyway, and now she's here, but she doesn't want to be here. She'd rather be someone else, but due to family and societal obligations, she must be here, marrying the wealthiest man she can find of Tom Buchanan, and that's why she's sad. We gave her spirits of ammonia and put ice in her forehead and hooked back into her wedding dress, and then half an hour later, when we walked out of the room, the pearls were around her neck, and the incident was over. The next day, at 5 o'clock, she married Tom Buchanan without so much as a shiver, and started off a 3-month trip to the South Seas. I saw them in Santa Barbara when they had come back, and I thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. If he left the room for a minute, she'd look around uneasily and say, "Where's Tom gone?" and wear the most abstracted expression until she saw him coming in the door. She used to sit on the sand with his head in her lap by the hour, rubbing her fingers over his eyes and looking at him with unfathomable delight. It was touching to see them together. It made you laugh in a hushed, fascinated way. So Daisy's saying, "I don't want to marry Tom. Just kidding, I'm fine." Goes get married. Louie, wee, la-di-da, 3-month honeymoon anniversary, yippee-ki-yay, love, love, love. I used to sit in his lap for hours, and oh, I'd cry terribly so, tears of missing this man when he was away for more than 5 seconds. But I find that interesting. It's sort of, cognitive dissonance of I'm really sad, but whatever, I'll go through this anyway. And then she's able to forget when she's taken on the honeymoon of how miserable she is. But it's only when Tom leaves the room does it seem like she remembers her misery. And she needs him sort of to bide her time. She needs him in the room all the time to get this attention all the time so that she doesn't have to remember the terrible thing that she's avoiding, the fact that she'll never be engaged to Gatsby, could never marry him, and that would be where her true happiness or fulfillment would lie. But instead, she is living a lie, and if she takes a break from that lie for merely one moment, her entire reality collapses, and she gains a sense of nervousness. But even so, Jordan says that she's never seen anyone so in love in their life before. So it seems that the love is genuine in a sense, just as much as it's a lie. And it said, they move with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild, but she came out with an absolutely perfect reputation. Perhaps because she doesn't drink. It's a great advantage not to drink among hard-drinking people. You can hold your tongue, and moreover, you can time any little irregularity of your own so that everyone else is so blind that they don't see or care. So she's saying that Daisy sort of spends most of her time with unconscious people, unconscious in the fact that they are drunkards and they don't pay too much attention to reality. And perhaps the reason she does that is so that she doesn't have to address her own fundamental reality of being a sad, melancholic woman due to never being able to end up with her true love of Mr. Gatsby. And this also makes an interesting point about the persona. So both, we know Gatsby doesn't drink, we learn in chapter 3. We're learning Daisy doesn't drink. And perhaps that is to preserve that persona. They both need to cast their siren songs in a sense, where they both need to speak these unimaginable loves towards other people to make them feel appreciated and to develop these highly crafted, highly prestigious personas. And perhaps if that persona cracks, the fictitious reality that they have constructed with the persona also cracks, and that sadness can sort of get out. And that perhaps is why they don't drink. And I suppose I'm wondering about myself, is that the reason I don't drink? Because I also, too, strive to maintain a certain facade and would like the world to view me in a certain way. Or maybe I don't drink because I simply have no interest in being unconscious in any form, but is such an attachment to consciousness a negative somehow, I wonder. And then Jordan ends the chapter by saying it's no coincidence that Gatsby bought the house. The house is adjacent to Tom's. He would like to see Daisy again. And Nick, you are the one he wishes to have invite Daisy over to meet Gatsby. And that will be the highlight of chapter 5, the meeting between Daisy, Gatsby, and Nick. Let me know your comments below about your main thoughts of the chapter, what you found resonated with you, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.